The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couture, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
That was a nice morning pour, Sam.
Yeah, that's the little 9:30 rosé.
Absolutely. So, hey, everybody, welcome to the Winemakers. I'm John.
It's rosé o'clock. Sorry, John.
With
Cold open.
Bart Hansen, Sam Couture, and Brian Casey. Bart, would you like to introduce our special guest this morning, please?
No, he doesn't.
Sam's podcast.
Well, as PJ keeps calling him, and although he defers the King of Cork, although, like we said, 112 years ago, Portugal got rid of the monarchy, so he's the Prime Minister of Cork. António Amorim, President, CEO, owner, family of Amorim Cork. So if you've ever opened a bottle of 16600, that's an Amorim Cork coming out of it. And lots of other products, lots of other uses. But we're going to dig in, we're going to become cork dorks today, John, because
that's a good thing.
Yeah. I know a little bit about our corks and how it happens, but it's one of those things, I think if you're in the wine business or a wine consumer, you sort of take for granted how that cork shows up there in that bottle, and then all the other things that are happening and all the sustainability and recycling, and so we have a lot to learn today, John.
And it's amazing how far corks have come, right?
Right.
The technology and qualitatively, having nothing to do with cork taint, but even just, the way you measure the quality of cork. I remember the first time I went to a cork factory and they had this very kind of rough computer that took a picture of every cork and counted every hole and the size of it, and then it went down a line and just kind of split the corks into different bags. It's amazing, and I'm sure it's come way farther than that.
Yeah, so I guess what we're saying is welcome to the show. Thank you for flying in, and I think one of the first things we should talk about is the incredible transformation that corks have taken on in the last 30 years, specifically for me, from working in restaurants my entire life and in the wine industry, that in the 90s all of the talk seemed to be about the finite resource of cork and how we were going to use it up, and we had to look for alternative closures, whether it be glass or synth or screw caps. And then 30 years later, how we're talking about this being one of the most sustainable products, and not just being used in wine closures, but in flooring, in clothes, replacing polyurethane in refrigeration systems, to one of my most intriguing ones that I don't know if you can speak to this today, but in making yogurt at home. And what? How has this conversation just done a complete 180 from the 90s to now?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. Cork is really a true gift from nature. As you know, cork is simply the bark of an oak tree, which is the cork oak tree that takes 25 years to give its first harvest, and then we harvest cork once every 9 years from then onwards, taking about a cork tree, the lifespan is about 200 years, so every single cork tree can be harvested between 15 to 18 times throughout their lifetime. So it's a unique species based on one specific geographical area, which is the Mediterranean basin. 80% of the cork production is Portugal and Spain. Portugal, 50% of the world's cork production. 30% of the cork being produced in Spain, and the rest produced in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. I've had a lot of people from this part of the world in California saying, could cork be produced here? There are cork trees in California, so I think it could be produced here. But I don't think that anybody is patient enough to wait for 25, 30, or 40 years for the return on their investment. That's why we have to do this on our part of the world, because we are the only patient people to wait this long.
I was going to say it's almost as gluttonous as the wine industry having to wait.
Well, there is. I don't know. I said this when you came in. There, at least when I was a kid, there was a couple of cork oak trees growing in the plaza in Sonoma. So definitely, it's something. I don't know how fruitful it would be.
On Carriga Road, there's a number of cork trees.
I'm sure you have the right climate and soil conditions for cork trees to grow here. I just think we need to accelerate that initial first harvest, which we are trying to do. There is research work that we are doing on the biological part of the plants that I believe we can one day come to a conclusion that we can accelerate that initial harvest, maintaining always the interval cycle of 9 years from then onwards. So what do you get from a cork tree? I mean, cork basically is mostly used for cork stoppers. Still today, 70% of the cork value is cork stoppers for wine bottles, for sparkling wine, and a growing business within the spirits premium industry. Cork can also be used for construction, interior decoration like flooring, wall tiles, insulation for houses, for as you said, cold chamber. It can also be used for a variety of new uses, from shoes, which is probably one of the most historical use for cork. Romans used to wear cork to produce their sandals. Today you have the Birkenstocks. All done with cork. You have orthopedic shoes, you have insoles, you have sports shoes with Nike, for example. So that's another important use. Cork used for aerospace. I mean, NASA discovered in cork a unique characteristic of being the product that they have tested that can resist the highest to temperature variation. So today we are clearly the largest supplier of cork for the satellite rocket launchers. I mean, this is the fastest growing cork usage on the planet at the moment. And for example, a company like SpaceX is the company in which we grew the most in the first 6 months of 2022, and today we also growing in Switzerland, in the UK, and elsewhere on this space program. So there is a unique characteristic to cork. Every single cell, every single cubic centimeter is composed of 40 million cells that basically are structured on a honeycomb. So 70% of the cellular composition of cork is air. That's why it's such a light, that's why it's such a compressible material, and that's why it has one of the unique characteristics why it goes into a bottleneck, which is the elastic memory. You can compress the bottle to go inside the bottle. It immediately expands, doing a perfect sealing onto a wine or a sparkling wine bottle. So, I mean, there is a lot that has been developed until now. We believe in our industry that there's still a lot more to be discovered in the future. But wine, sparkling wine and spirits is 70% of what we do today in the cork industry.
And who were the first people to actually put a cork in a wine bottle?
Well, there's a historical debate. There is some consensus about Dom Perignon. So cork exists for more than 8,000 years, but as a closure, as a stopper to go into a wine bottle, the consensus go to Dom Perignon being the first person. Cork was used to as a lid for amphors that used to transport wine. But in a bottle, it was more recently. Dom Perignon tried to seal a champagne bottle with a wood stopper. He was not able to. With a textile stopper, he was not able to stop the gas and the liquid from coming out. It was only with a cork that he was able to stop to put a stopper on that bottle of champagne. So there is some debate, but the consensus goes to Dom Perignon being the person that has converted cork into a stopper.
Okay, I heard it was the Egyptians way before then, but if you want to give credit to Dom Perignon,
I think
okay. I understand why.
Hard to say no to Dom Perry.
It has to do also with the glass development, and I doubt that the Egyptians were already producing glass in those days. So it's a more recent development. There are people that say that is about 150 years before Dom Perignon. There are some other historians that say that Dom Perignon was the first person to. So a lot of the Champagne history is also associated with the cork more recent history.
And what were they doing with cork before they were using it to put into bottles?
Fishing net buoys.
Oh, sure.
Cork beehives, where the bees make their honey, because it's an insulated area. Cork was used as a raw material to insulate houses. There are old houses that have been used for insulation. Shoes, which is probably one of the most, sandals in this case, one of the most historic uses for cork. So those are some of the most referred in the bibliography.
History. And so let's get to your family. When did your family first start in the industry?
In 1870 with my great-grandfather. He basically made a partnership with a local wealthy family. Him being the working part of that family, he was the cork expert, producing cork for the port wine bottles. So he started in 1870 on his own at the production workshop to produce cork stoppers for the local port wine companies. 30-something years later, that joint venture basically broke. He came to his original birthplace, where he created a small company with 2 workers, also making cork stoppers. And it was only with the second generation.
With 2 workers?
With 2 workers.
Okay.
So they're basically like stamping them out by hand?
Yes. They were basically making from a cork plank a square, carving the square into a cylinder, and supplying those corks to the port wine historical cellars that still are there in Porto. And then he came and he had 2 workers, but he had, at the age of 54, he married a lady with 21, and they had 9 children. 3 of those children migrated to Brazil, where they have set up cork stoppers facility, one in São Paulo, the other in Rio de Janeiro. So basically the job of the company was to supply the port wine cellars that were 20 miles away, but also supply the raw material for the children of the second generation that have migrated. So the mother was making sure that the best cork was going to these guys. So they did very, very well in Brazil, separating themselves with time from their brothers and sisters in Portugal. And they started to open a much wider, much larger company in 1922. Already with 200 or 300 workers, with a canteen, with medical assistance. So in those days, that was already a bigger scale company. Then the third generation, which is normally the one that kills the business, in our family, was the one that has expanded the business. So
congratulations on that.
I mean, that's something that happened from the late 50s to the 60s. So we started, for every single kilo of cork, 25 kilos is cork stoppers. The rest is what we used to call a byproduct, a sub-product that we used to export at the time to the largest cork corporation in the world, which was an American company based from Lancaster called Armstrong Cork Company, that is still today exists. They don't do cork anymore. They are a large flooring and ceiling manufacturer that had 14 manufacturing units in Catalonia. So we were exporting all these byproducts to one of their facilities in Catalonia for them to make several other cork products. And from the 1960s, we start reusing those cork byproducts into flooring, into insulation, into underlayment, into other types of cork stoppers. So the industrial growth of the company basically takes over in 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The 80s, from the late 80s, we start to take control of our own distribution. We set up companies in Napa Valley, in Bordeaux, in the Prosecco area, in Germany, in Australia, in South Africa, in Argentina, in Chile. So we started to do the international expansion of the company. But then in 2000, there was a very big earthquake in the cork industry. Plastic stoppers came in.
Yeah.
aluminium screw caps came in.
Yeah.
And, that was a very challenging time to all of us, that I believe that was a decisive time. Every single time we have had a challenge, we have converted it into opportunity. And this is really what has made this company be in this business for over 150 years. This year we celebrate 153 years of history of the company.
153 years. From 153 years ago, they were hand carving them, to now they're in Elon Musk SpaceX rockets. That's wild.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, as far as we have to figure that those early corks that were hand carved, there probably wasn't a lot of thought putting into the differences in between the corks. I mean,
Like grading the corks.
grading the corks.
Yeah.
So the technology has changed immensely, because anyone who's ever tried to put a cork in a newly bottled wine, you know how hard it is to get it back into it, or how hard
Right.
it is to force a cork into a bottle. So those early ones were hand carved enough that they could squeeze them in, but they didn't have the resiliency. I mean, there must have been a lot of leakers. It must have been a higher fail rate, correct?
I mean, at the time, the technology was not as
And this is not a negative thing, but
Yeah.
this is how much the technology has changed. I mean, at what point did they really start to identify the quality of the corks and the technology there to have less loss and better sealing?
I mean, everything the people knew at the time was to grade the corks, to make sure that you would select the corks against from the level of porosity, which is still today valid for the natural high-end stoppers. The less porous, the better density you have in the corks, the more high-end, because that cellular structure allows the cork to perform better on wines that need to age with time, and that air tightness. I mean, cork releases its natural air when it's squeezed to go in the bottle. Those things were not known at the time. Those things, people, in order to make the cork insertable into the bottle, they were wetting the cork.
Right.
But when you squeeze it, all that humidity that you have added on basically is released onto the wine. I mean, today, in the last 30 or 40 years, things have been done completely differently. So cork has clearly a physical, mechanical role, assuring that the wine does not come out of the bottle. But on the very high-end wines, we also have a role in making sure that Chateau Margaux from 2000, that is going to be bottled in 2002, and Parker is going to say, this wine is ready to start to be tasted from 2008. And what is the role of our cork in the improvement of that wine that for 6 years changed to the better due to also the cork? So that's the kind of thing that today we are studying, researching. We have winemakers, we have PhD people that bring science to this natural gift of nature, which is cork, making sure that everything that cork does can be explained and can be mastered from our production point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, at some point, you guys really got a handle on the quality point. Was that that was obviously probably started in Europe, because the American wine industry was very, very small. It must have been in the 50s, 60s?
Yes, 50s, run by 3 levels of people, French, German, and Dutch people at the time, that really made substantial improvements on what we call the surface coating and the bleaching of those corks, because corks used to be bleached with chlorine. Today they are bleached with hydrogen peroxide, making sure that those corks were disinfected, that their microbiological level was fit to purpose. And this was done by the Germans, the French, and the Dutch people in the late 40s, 50s, and that was a huge upgrade. More recently, the issues have not been so much on physical, mechanical, has been on sensory. And this is really when we started to put also resources, experts, science behind technology, behind practices, making sure that we were improving the quality, the reliability, the performance of the corks that we were putting out in the market. That has been the work of the last 15, 20 years.
Cool, thank you. Thank you.
Well, and for those listeners out there that aren't in the wine industry, let's explain TCA for people so they understand, because I think that was where you made some of the most, probably the biggest advance. And I think, according to you guys, have basically eliminated TCA in corks. And kind of explain what it is for people, and so they know. I think a lot of people have heard the term corked, but I still, opening wine at a lot of different tables, find that people don't know exactly what that means.
TCA is a molecule that creates a sensory deviation in the cork or other materials that you have, not only cork. It's formed by metabolization of free chlorine that is everywhere with mold. That creates the predecessors of TCA that can generate into TCA. It can come directly from the forest. It can be generated throughout the production process. That's why we need to have an extensive corrective measurements that we need to put in place from the forest from the bark, as we say, to the bottle. So and it's such a potent off flavor. It's not harmful to people's health at all, but it creates a negative, unpleasant feeling when you're tasting a bottle of wine. And we have basically spent the last 15 years trying, and I think that coming to terms with it, making sure that we would be removing TCA from any cork if TCA was to be there or to be formed. So today we have clearly technology, we have practices, we have quality control procedures. A lot was helped by a lab in California called ETS. They were the first ones that developed.
We'll get the Burns on here.
Gordon,
yeah.
Yeah, that is
that'd
clearly
be a good guest.
A wine laboratory, very credible, that has developed at the beginning of 2000 a system that allowed us to measure TCA, the releasable TCA that could be imparted into a bottle of wine. And from the moment you set a figure and you start telling how people are sensitive to this figure, until you get to zero, there is no stoppage. And that's what we have done over the last few years. Improve the manufacturing practices throughout the production process, introducing technology that could make TCA volatile. And the index Merck says that TCA is volatile with steam. So we've been using temperature, steam, to remove and get rid of TCA. Quality control practices. A lot of wineries in this country have for many, many years used the services of companies like ETS to make sure that every single lot they were bringing in was fitting in the criteria that was set at the time by ETS. Today, I don't think this is any longer necessary, because the industry, almost as a whole, has clearly mastered the TCA the TCA issue. I mean, it's a natural product. We will get 100% security. We will get a fair amount of security, which is absolutely acceptable. But 20 years ago, we had levels that were not commercially or business acceptable, and those had to be corrected.
But why was that? Because if basically the remedy was steam, why wasn't someone addressing that or using that process earlier?
I mean, you were confronted with a higher degree of problems with a huge market growth that we had in the 90s. I mean, a country like America in 1990 was using 550 million corks. A country like America in 2000, 10 years later, was using 1.6 billion corks.
Wow!
So those are the type of growth. In Australia,
And
in
research and
1990,
technology.
110 million corks. In 2000, 1 billion corks. So this level of demand was too fast, and the production systems in place probably did not control this level of growth as it should have been. So
Yeah, I mean, it's research and technology, right?
it's
Is
research and development practices
Right.
that probably solve 70% of any deviation that we talk about. But that's not enough. We need technology. Steam is clearly one way of doing it. There are more recent methodologies like supercritical for other type of industrial technological stoppers that can also be used. But today, the issue of TCA is something that the industry has dealt with.
And remember, there have been wineries who have gotten TCA in their winery, and it had nothing to do with the cork.
Be in the barrels.
Hansel had a problem where it was in the cellar, and it made the wine industry change their practices. You know, wood pallets and chlorine in the same place gets TCA growing. It gets in the air. It gets in the barrels. It gets
in the walls.
anywhere.
I know that, but I always rejected to assume that argument on our behalf, because that meant that we were finding excuses not to do anything.
Yeah.
And the day that we still find contaminated cork with TCA inside our facilities that have never touched a winery floor, we have a problem.
Right.
The day we can solve this problem within our own facilities, then it's going to be somebody else's problem, because you are completely right. TCA is not exclusive to cork. You find it in fruit, you find it in wood, you find it in construction wood, so you find it in barrels. There is a lot of possibilities.
If you've ever been to a flea market in Mexico and you walk through the leather area, you know, where the leather jackets are, you walk through and you go, oh, that's corked and that's corked.
Yeah.
I mean, there's TCA everywhere.
It's not corked, it's TCA.
TCA, right? It's
Thank you.
but we say those of us that experience, you go, oh, that leather jacket must be corked.
no. I've had like iced tea at a restaurant that tastes like TCA. And I think it probably lives in the ice machine. I'm not really sure like how that happens, but it also, you know, anywhere that chlorine is used, it can volatilize and form TCA, right?
I was at a restaurant in Kenwood, and someone
That shall
bought us-
remain nameless.
No, you could say it. It was the old Kenwood restaurant.
Okay.
And a salesperson bought us a bottle of tequila for our table, and it was corked. And it was corked so, you know, it had TCA so bad. It was amazing. Like, we kind of joked about that for years. But again, it's everywhere.
But, you know, the important thing is that this is not a consumer debate. This is a debate for professionals. I mean, there was a UK supermarket that asked their consumers about TCA, and people were finding TCA in screw cap bottles, in plastic stopped bottles, in Tetra Pak. So this is not an issue to be technical, discussed and debated with consumers. This is an issue for professionals. In the wine industry, there are a lot of very, very good professionals, very good professional labs. We have also our scientists working in our research and development departments. And if you keep the discussion amongst them, we came to the solution and to bring the levels of TCA, whatever that might odd bottle still be there, to a very, very low level. So today, this is not an issue anymore. There are other issues that will need to be discussed in the future, oxygen permeation. There are other things, but this one, I think that the cork industry has done an enormous job. But, you know, this is not a proof of intelligence. We had no other option. It's a question of survival. Either we did this or we will not exist in the future. And this was done.
Right. And for our listeners, those of you who have listened to a lot of shows, you've heard our guests talk about how they've moved away from traditional cork. But that argument is not because of TCA. Their argument is, as you said, oxygen permeation, and they're finding that. And again, I think we're very much on a learning curve with that, where we were with TCA 20 years ago. Was that a fair
Yeah,
statement?
I think so. I mean, there are several elements. I mean, the type of wine. If the wine is to be consumed relatively quickly, you probably do not need a very high-end natural stopper. Today we have very reliable, absolutely bulletproof solutions within technical corks that can give a reliable cork. TCA is no longer an issue on these types of cork. So I don't think that you need to spend too much. There is also some budget limitations, namely on the large scale companies, because when they sum all the millions and millions of corks that they use, that makes big budget. So today we offer a wide variety of corks for that can fit in different wine segments. And I think that's a great thing for wine people, because they can choose from the various segments. And the good thing is that we have different price points, we have different performance features, we have different guarantees that we can give on the different corks. Our objective is always to meet the expectations of the people producing the wine, because they act on behalf of the final consumers.
Since we've had so many people on the show talking about the benefits of technical corks, and from high-end wines to more drink now kind of wines, I'm a purist. I don't like the designated hitter. I like natural corks on my wine. Will you just speak to that side of the argument a little bit? Like, why am I right in not wanting to go to a technical cork?
I mean, technical cork is certainly a cork that performs very well. It meets all the expectations that you as a winemaker, as a wine company have for a certain typology of wines. But the great wines of this world are mostly sealed with natural corks. Those are wines that are supposed to age, to evolve with time. And natural cork, due to its integral cellular structure, is clearly the cork that allows for that improvement to happen better in a wine. There is no type of binders used. It's a pure natural cork. And we believe that for a certain segment of the high-end wines, that you can control the moment in which you're going to sell them, but difficultly you can control the moment that they are going to be finally drunk. And you want to go back to your 20-year-old bottle that you have at home and have that unique feeling. And natural cork is probably the only cork closure that can give you this fantastic sentiment over time. Yeah. So I would say that natural corks clearly have a fundamental role on wine segmentation, being the right closure for the super premium, ultra premium, and the iconic wines that you have on this planet.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I hadn't really thought about until you talked about it is, everybody talks about these the technical corks, the composite corks, being, that they know exactly how much oxygen is exchanged. But with a natural cork, this sort of beehive structure that's in there, it makes no sense to me to destroy that structure and then try and put it back together when it's like this perfectly created by nature formed magical thing, right?
But due to the microcellular structure of the cork, clearly these technical corks, they fit in their job perfectly well, because as I said, every cubic centimeter has 40 million cells. So within those granules, you still find a lot of those cells that give that elastic memory, that have that air inside their cellular structure, but it's not the same. Once I was talking to a Swarovski family member, and they make crystals.
Yeah, I was saying.
They make crystals.
Just talking to a Swarovski family member.
Somebody one day said, but Mr. Swarovski, but you're trying to say that crystals are diamonds? And they say, no, of course not. Diamonds are for royalty. The rest of the market is for us. And I think with natural cork is a little bit the same. I mean, natural cork is for these high-end wines, these exquisite wines, these wines that are really that they are making the headlines of the wine industry, in my point of view. Technical corks is for everything else. Right. But today, everything else is more important than there are many more people in the world than royalty, if you see what I mean. So
Right.
the big chunk of the market within corks are clearly technical corks. But never forget one thing. One business is an aspirational business. Not everybody has a screaming eagle, but everybody would love to have a screaming eagle one day. Not everybody has tasted a screaming eagle, but everybody wants to taste a screaming eagle one day. And that's the kind of thing that you have in the wine business. So I think that cork can play in a fundamental role on that wine evolution over time. And different corks bring different evolutions to the wine. So it's a good thing to have, because today there is an option. There are different closures, technology, segments, price points, and I think that we can really do our job, which is to supply the whole of the wine industry. And we have corks that go from 6 cents to $6 a piece. So, I mean, this is quite
I don't feel so bad at my price right now.
this is quite I would say a democratic product, because we work with all social classes that you may have in the market.
Is that what they call the mirror top corks?
Some of them, but difficult to make those mirror end corks like Romane Conti and all that, because it's, out of a floor grade you probably get 6-7% of those corks. So I mean, we basically have a very, very limited availability of these corks.
Yeah, who gets those corks?
I mean,
who buys those corks?
America, on average, the Californian market, on average, is probably the market worldwide where we supply the better natural corks. But then you always have within France the Grand Cru, the Burgundy top wines that probably take some of the best corks out there. But then you have in Brunello, in Barolo, in Amarone also some great wines. So, I mean, what we call, there was this segmentation a few years ago, the iconic wines. I mean, every single country has their iconic wines. But on average, America has a pretty good range of corks coming onto this part of the world. No doubt about that.
So we're not going to start using $6 corks, Brian.
They're beautiful though. I don't know if you've ever seen them before. But
I don't know. Now I do need to find one though.
Yeah.
But the problem is a
Brian,
$6 cork.
Explain this mirror.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask, if we could go back to the process, because it's those particular corks are a part of the process where you're getting them hand punched out. Now, I always remember, so there's a lot of people that don't know how corks are made. I think I probably thought when I was younger that they would go up to a tree with like a cylindrical punch drill and pull these little plugs out. And that's sort of how it's done. But will you explain the process of how they're actually getting the bark off the tree, and then the process of getting it to the factory and the processing?
So a cork, thank you for the question. I think that's a good opportunity to try to let you know how things are done. The cork is, as I said, an oak tree that has a very specific characteristic. It develops a sap on the outer part of the bark that basically runs for spring and a little bit in autumn time. Throughout summer and winter, the tree basically hibernates. When the tree hibernates, this sap is converted from liquid to solid, becoming another cork layer for the cork. That's why we can only harvest the cork in springtime, because in springtime there is a detachment between the wooden part of the tree and the cork itself. And that's the only time of the year in which we are able to harvest the cork. So the cork is harvested until today manually, and we bring planks out of that bark. So we basically remove the skin of the tree in rectangular planks that we bring in-house. We basically store those corks for an average of 12 months. The corks that are harvested in June 2022, the initial part are only going to be used from January 2023, and the final cork of 2022 by December of 23. So we have an average period of storage of 12 months, being the first cork 6 months and the last cork 18 months. throughout this period of time, the cork is going to lose a lot of these physical tensions because it was on a concave phase for 9 years on a tree. So we're going to flatten this out. And the first industrial process that we're going to do is to boil the cork. Yeah. Boil the cork with clean water at 98 or 90% Celsius temperature in order to make sure the cork becomes more flexible, to disinfect the cork. Because you are bringing hot water, you make the cork become flat because it becomes the cork more flexible. Right. Then you're going to grade the cork according to thickness and to grade. Grade is defined by the level of porosity that you have in the cork. Different grades are used for different uses of applications of cork. For example, a thin cork, we make natural cork discs that we use on the champagne corks. The thicker cork, we make corks that are going to go for red and white wine bottles. So we grade those corks, the ones that are suited for natural cork stoppers. We're going to slice them in bands, and we're going to perforate with a metal device to make sure that you get that hole being done on that cork band. So then we're going to use those corks to select them from a visual point of view. Once, twice, 3 times. Hand select for the very, very high-end corks. We're going to bleach part of them or not in hydrogen peroxide in order to disinfect those corks again. And then we're going to export them to our companies in Napa Valley, where we are going to print those corks with the name of the winery and put eventually the year of the wine that those corks are sealed. And we do the surface coating, which is silicone paraffin or a beeswax surface coating, and deliver this to the wineries. Yeah. What do we do with the other 75% of the cork that is not cork stoppers? We're going to grind them and obtain granules. The low specific weight granules we can make technical cork from. The heavy specific weight granules we use for flooring or as an infield for turf fields. America is our biggest market for that, replacing recycled rubber. Recycled rubber can release some fumes. Cork is a natural product and keeps the temperature down throughout summertime. So that's another use for cork. So as somebody said, nothing is wasted. Everything is transformed. Everything is used in our cork applications and uses for stoppers, for flooring, for other materials, as we have discussed before. So in a very small, compressed way, that's basically the production process that we have. It sounds simple. Probably we are the ones that make it a lot more complicated than this. But
you skipped over it. I mean, you went through an important part of it. But when talk about harvesting by hand,
and I want to talk about the farming in general, because I think that's that's my shtick here. But also, this is an agricultural product, right? I mean, we talked about there
is year-to-year variation.
But it's also like, how do you know? So. Describe the groves or the forests that you're growing, you're farming, and then how do you know when it's time to harvest? Like, I mean, we're going out and we're measuring the bricks and sugars on our grapes, but how do you know when that sap flow is right to go and pull that bark off?
Follow the weather conditions. Normally, this coincide with the last week of May, with the first week of June, depending on the year. For example, last year was a difficult year for harvesting because we had a severe drought in Europe. Unlike this year, we had plenty of rain coming through, so we should be in for a very, very good harvest in 2023. But when we see that the tree is already starting its biological cycle, it can be harvested. Okay. So that's basically, that normally happens until the 10th, 12th of June and lasts until the end of July, first 2 weeks of August in Europe. So that's the right time for us to harvest the cork. It's still a very manual operation. We do it with an axe. We're trying to, same way as it was done 250 years ago. We are introducing new technology to make sure that we increase the productivity of that part of the production. So it needs to be executed still today with very, very qualified people, but very well paid. I mean, probably one of the best paid professional agricultural jobs that we have in the whole of Europe, and those skills are important, because with an axe you need to cut the cork but not harm the tree.
Right.
Because if you harm the tree, then that tree is going to have trouble on regrowing its new cork layer for the following
susceptible to moisture or insects or
exactly.
Yeah.
9 years. So that's why it's such a sensitive part.
Yeah.
Normally we ask the cork growers to be responsible for the harvesting themselves, because the assets, the trees, they belong to them. So I don't want to be responsible for the harvesting of the cork. They should take care of it in their own way, because I'm not there harvesting the cork myself. I need to hire somebody, so that becomes difficult to control. So we prefer that the cork growers harvest the cork themselves. We do, how does the evaluation of the cork? We don't pay all the cork at the same price. If the cork allows me to make a lot of $6 cork stoppers, I can pay more for that cork.
Right.
If the cork does not allow me to make so much $6 cork, I only can make technical cork or flooring with it, then I cannot pay so much. So we evaluate the cork according to the grade. How do we evaluate the grade? We go before harvesting and we cut our own people with an axe a square. So we have a software program that tells us where to pick up the samples on each cork forest that we have all mapped out in our computers, in our cellular phones. We are going to take a small sample. We're going to evaluate that sample, and after we take samples from all the trees that we have to identify, then we can engage into a negotiation and into a discussion with the cork grower. Of course, every single grower has the best cork on planet Earth, which is absolutely normal, and we can never say that they do not have, but we need to bargain the price according to the quality evaluation we have estimated for his harvest or for his property.
Are there different land is different where you're growing these trees? Yes. Can you look at the land and kind of decide what sort of corks you're going to get there? Does the grower's reputation come into that? Does the environmental changes every year come into those
all
decisions?
Of that needs to be put into perspective, and there is an additional element, which is the age of the tree. I mean, if you have a tree that is 60, 70, 50, 80 years old, the thickness of that cork should be higher. The trees are much more vigorous than if they are 180 years, that you get a lot more thin cork. So the age of the tree is absolutely critical. The type of the soil, so we have sandy soils with a huge drainage. We have other types of argile soils that do not have such good drainage. So all of that is taken into the density of the trees, right, that you have, the size of each tree that you have. So all of that, and it's also important to have the past historical data,
right,
because we have a database that goes back to 1957 on all the Portuguese and Spanish cork growers. So we know exactly on the cork that we bought 9 years ago, what were the production yields that we got on that cork. So sometimes it's a question of us confirming, because with climate change, that cork might change within the next 9 years of growth, and we need to validate that. But normally, when you have good, sound trees, you're going to have better cork every single time, and you're going to be able to pay more for that cork than the other ones that are not so good.
But there kind of is a sweet spot with the trees in the age. Otherwise, when they get older, they're not as productive.
No.
No.
And
so at some point you say, okay, it's time to pull this
No, it's forbidden by law to cut cork trees.
So this is good. I think we should talk about regulation
It's
by
forbidden
the government.
by law to cut cork trees because the idea that our governments have is the following. Today in Portugal and Spain, 95% of the forest that exists was not man-planted. It's what we call the conservation forest. So natural regeneration happening with birds, with local fauna having a big role on the new cork trees.
Over 100 different species.
Exactly,
in there,
exactly. So we are one of the few hotspots of biodiversity in the world. The 35th or the 36th biggest hotspot of biodiversity is the cork forest. So it is clearly an area that probably we need to improve with science later. But what we have today is the result of this. So the density is not the same everywhere because nature does not work.
The density of the trees.
Of the trees. Is not. Sometimes you have 100 trees, sometimes you have 150, sometimes you have 50 trees per hectare. Because unlike vineyards that are planted one after the other, that is called a production forest. We believe that we clearly need to continue our conservationist role, but we need to blend that with some human planted forest, what we call a production forest. Today is 95 conservation, 5 production. Wow. Probably in the next 10 years it's going to be 87-13, and that's it. That will be a very good balance. Yeah. But these trees avoid the advancement of the desertification, because these trees need to have very solid root structures to defend themselves over 200 years of life span. So, and they are, for example, a country like Tunisia, the desert stops where the cork forest starts. So that's the kind of thing that these are trees that are not in need of a lot of water. 400 to 600 millimeters of water is enough to feed these trees. These trees are... There is a Portuguese scientist that said that no other tree gives so much demanding so little. And this is really a fantastic summary of what cork trees are. So how can we face the future of cork production? Clearly, I believe that we still need to support this level of conservation forest, and everything is natural regrown. We probably need to complement this with 10 or 12% of production forests, in which we're going to have a much higher density, and clearly we need more cork to supply the growing demand for such a natural, sustainable material. Cork, for every single ton of cork produced, it captures 73 tons of CO2.
Holy crap, say that again.
For every single ton of cork produces, it captures 73 tons of CO2. Yeah. So every single cork product has a negative carbon footprint. That tree is there day and night, absorbing, capturing CO2. And because the tree is never cut, it doesn't stop capturing for 200 years.
There's your reason for using cork, Sam. You didn't
totally
need the rest.
No,
and what's interesting is the age of the tree and the density or thickness of the cork. So you can imagine families that have that are farming, harvesting forests where the trees are getting older. Maybe they're in that sweet spot for one of their generations for their family, and they're getting paid top dollar for it. But then as the trees are getting older, maybe then they're getting paid less, and then they have to wait until the forest sort of regenerates so you can almost see like a cycle.
But they don't have to wait. The natural regeneration is happening the whole time. Corks produce acorns every year. Some of these acorns are going to produce new trees. What do you need to be careful? You cannot put a lot of cattle inside that forest, because if you produce a lot of cattle, they're going to eat all the acorns and they're going to eat all the young saplings. Right. So you need a low usage of cattle inside those cork forests. Otherwise, you're not going to have natural regeneration. So what people seek is to have on the cork valuation the compensation for abdicating from other types of uses that could also bring them additional revenue. So pressure on the valuation of cork, namely on the valuation of the better quality cork.
I mean, it's like the barrel industry in that they have to farm the piece of property. If there's diseased trees, I would imagine they have to be removed. If there's trees that are growing the wrong way, they have to be there to make sure it doesn't interfere with an older tree. Is that all kind of correct?
It is very correct, but you cannot do that on your own. You need official services to come in to evaluate that the situation is as you've just described it, in order for what we call the sanitary cut of the corks to be allowed.
Right.
If you are caught cutting cork trees illegally, you cannot have another usage for that ground for dozens of years. You can be put in jail, which has happened already in our country. So it is a protected species.
Yeah.
There was a huge investment on years and years and years of those farmers, of the forest owners, to let these trees grow. Once they are productive, you cannot really cut them. When they are at the end of their life time, there are diseases that might affect one or two trees. Of course, that you need to remove them as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it could contaminate other neighboring trees.
Yeah, I mean that regulation is incredibly important, for what you guys do.
That regulation also defines when can a cork tree start to be harvested.
There you go.
So at 1.3 meters height,
Yep.
it needs to have a perimeter of 70 centimeters to be allowed to be harvested.
Okay.
Otherwise, you pay also heavy fines if you are caught harvesting too much young trees, because the cork is not suitable yet for production.
And when did the government take over that regulation? When did they start that?
2000 and... Well, this regulation was existing for a very long time. 2001 was the year in which it was much reinforced.
That's really interesting. That seems so late.
But it also, I mean, it kind of like all coincides with the challenges that you were talking about, and the sort of the challenges, the challengers to cork, right?
Yeah.
With all the screw tops and the plastics, and also 20 years ago, we were way more worried about TCA in corks.
Right.
That's problems have all sort of been cleaned up, seems like, in the last 25, 30 years.
But this legislation was also a response. We come from a small country in which we have every year a substantial amount of forest fires. The hottest area of the country is where we have the cork trees. So it's supposed to be the area with more fires. It's clearly the only area of the country where there are no fires, because the cork tree is the only tree that is adapted to the local soil and climate. Other fastest growing trees like pines or eucalyptus, they are the ones that generate all these forest fires. So the government wants clearly a much larger investment in cork trees that are local, that there is an industry that is where Portugal is a global world leader, rather than to invest in other forest species that are going to have as consequence fires and sometimes deaths of people and destruction of homes and things like that. So cork is clearly the tree species that represents Portugal, and I think this is very, very important. It was probably the only unanimous decision taken in the last 30 years in our parliament, because having a parliament to decide something unanimously is very, very difficult. And the cork tree, to be the symbol of our country, has been probably the last unanimous decision taken in Portugal.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how important is the cork industry to Portugal?
I mean, it's a small industry everywhere. I mean, compared to the big-scale companies that you have in your country and the big-scale operation, we're talking about globally probably an industry that is 1.7.
But for Portugal?
For Portugal, we produce... We have 33% of the land with cork trees worldwide. That produces 50% of the total cork worldwide. And we manufacture in Portugal probably 75 to 80% of the cork worldwide. So you're talking about an industry that has a global export value of $1.2, $1.3 billion with a global market cap, if you can say, just slightly below $2 billion. That's the final consumer price that you have for some cork products with transport, with distribution, with all that. So, I mean, it's a small industry that represents 3 or 4% of our total exports. But, you know, it's an industry where we are different from everybody else.
So proud of it. I mean, think about those headlines, Sam. Napa Valley Cabernet grapes pulled out for cork trees.
Yeah, Sam, I think you need to start an initiative here.
Plant more cork trees.
Absolutely. Well, they're fireproof.
Cork and agave.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm ready.
cork and agave, pulling out Cabernet and planting cork and agave.
Look, I mean, you know, I could plant cork trees, but most likely it'll be Althea that's harvesting them, right?
You know, but you also need to have the idea that some of those trees exist that allow for a business to be there today. So it's probably our obligation. And Amorim, we invested in 20,000 acres of forest areas to take advantage of the existing trees, but to plant more trees. Over the next 5 years, we're going to be planting 1.5 million cork trees in those 20,000 acres. So for us, we have a research and development program going forward also on the biological part of the plant. How can we make sure? What can we do? You do clonal selection of vines. How can we do the same for cork trees? Make them more resistant to climate change. Give them better quality of cork. So there is a huge program that we have and we are engaging in that. I believe it's absolutely crucial for a product that is clearly in higher demand, not only for wine, sparkling, and spirits, but also for the other uses that we have in the world. So there is a demand. Demand is due to the performance of the product and is due to the sustainability credentials of the product. Yeah. A cork stopper can improve the carbon footprint of a wine bottle by 30%. We can, with the CO2 capture, offset the emissions that the glass bottle has created. So that's how important cork could be for the carbon footprint of a wine bottle.
It's amazing the turnaround. I mean, and from the conversation that was being had in the 1990s until now is just a complete 180.
Fantastic.
Right. And all the different uses that I had no idea until I started watching some videos on things that they were doing with cork. It's amazing.
Right. The special effects on the Hollywood studios. Because special effects. Right. So when they do these scenarios and these big explosions, I mean, either use artificial material or can use a cork conglomerate material that cork can be used. The possibility of corks can be recycled is clearly a way forward to us having more raw material available to provide the growth, making sure that we conclude the circular economy with cork recycling. So, I mean, there is so much more going for a sustainable product that performs a unique role in its various uses. So, I mean, I'm being very limited on the uses and the applications of cork, but I can be here the whole day talking about the use of cork for electric battery protection on electric cars. We have now put cork as a floating platform to install solar panels on water reservoirs in our country, because cork floats and is 40% more sustainable than all the other materials that you can put up there. So, I mean, this is what we have today. But the important thing is that we will not stop researching new uses, new applications, and new ideas on how can we create more value for this unique raw material that is cork.
I told you I'm gonna buy one of these yogurt nests. If you guys haven't seen it, I had no idea that this was even a possibility. But
yoga mats
and yoga mats as well.
Yeah. I have some cork yoga products.
Yeah.
Your energy
blocks
is
and
different from those days onwards.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's a whole other show. But I mean, this is. I'm stoked. This is beyond my expectations of what we were going to get out of this show, Antonio, because this is a solution to so many of the things that we're talking about, and it seems like cork can replace plastic and all kinds of things, and it way beyond anything having to do with wine. And it comes from trees that we need more of, not less of. It just like it all makes so much sense.
But if we want to be coherent about living in a better planet, there are two things we need to do. We need to consume products with a better carbon footprint.
Yep.
I think that cork clearly qualifies.
Yep.
But we need also to invest more in carbon sink. And that's where the cork plantations also play a role.
Right.
So I really think that we are in front of something unique that unfortunately is relatively small, but in our part of the world, for the industries that we work with, it can really change things when you put sustainable development also in perspective.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. It's awesome.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the listeners. We appreciate having you here today. Thank you for flying in just to do the podcast.
His first American podcast appearance. We got the scoop.
Nice.
We'll win some awards, I'm sure.
Of course. And listeners, if you have any questions, please send them out to us, and we'll forward them over to PJ.
We'll keep our cork dork this going, because there's definitely a lot we can talk about on this topic. So it's fantastic.
So tell us, what else are you doing while you're here?
Well, just supporting our people, because we have great teams in Napa Valley, which is clearly a area that has been absolutely crucial for the development of our company. We've been here since 82 and 89, so supporting the local wine industry and watching this fantastic growth that this industry has shown in the last 30 or 40 years, drinking some wine, because clearly we are in one of the best wine areas in the whole world, and we have the experience to travel to other parts of this globe and enjoying whatever you have here. I mean, we were discussing this. This is paradise land for somebody coming from overseas. I mean, you really have something unique out here. Not only the people, the warmth that you really welcome us into your country, but also everything that you can go for, the climate, the landscape, amazing. I mean, love it.
Awesome.
Well, we ordered the weather just for you, so
good.
Enjoy it while you're here.
Good timing.
The last 3 weeks were good for the cork tree growth. We needed all the oak trees are appreciated.
All right, well, it's looking like you have another appointment, so thank you very much for
They're
being
getting
on
restless
the show.
in the other room.
Yeah. They're like packing things up. Thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll come look for you on Wednesday in Sacramento.
Recycle your corks. Compost your corks.
That's one
we
thing.
We didn't get to the cork recycling thing.
That's the one piece that I'm just like really missing is what we're doing with this basket. But we'll open it up to discussion with PJ maybe.
And quickly, and maybe Antonio, if you have this answer or somebody else, how do people, if you want to follow along with what Amorim's doing, there's an Instagram account.
Yep. There's an Instagram, there's an Amorim.com where we have our corporate page with all the business units there, the new uses, everything that I was telling you about, the carbon footprint, how much of an importance that is to everything that we do. Amorim.com is probably
AMORIM, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And Yogurt's Nest, YOGHURT Nest. Look it up.
And you can make yogurt in cork.
I'm going to be making yogurt next week.
Okay. All right, we'll see how this goes.
Thanks, Antonio. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Everybody, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. We are the winemakers.